The next sort of disaster recovery group that we're going to cover from our original matrix are those that have a high tolerance for downtime. In the grouping that we did, these also have a low tolerance for data loss. So these are going to be our two sort of new guiding principles that we're going to aim to achieve as part of this particular discussion. And the sort of variable piece here is again reduced capacity. So in terms of how we deploy, we're going to relax the restriction on downtime. And that makes things, well, basically quite a lot easier. The whole reason we wanted to make sure, going back to our DC1 and DC2 scenario, the whole reason we wanted to guarantee that we had an automatic failover and hence required to have a third location, a third data center in the mix here, was to avoid that downtime, to avoid that manual intervention that's required to actually make DC2 here become a primary in the case that DC1 disappears. So that means that most of the rest of the discussion remains the same, but we have basically extra wiggle room. Now, there are a couple of quirks on this one. You can have applications that have a high tolerance for downtime, but only at specific times of the day. Like, for example, office-based applications, right? They're generally going to be in use during business hours in a particular time zone. The case where that wouldn't be true is if you have a 24/7 type operation, follow the sun, where it's business hours, but it's business hours across 3 or 4 time zones, and hence is actually really 24 hours a day. That still has a high tolerance for downtime for the most part, because most of the time when you're talking about that kind of office-based application, even if it is follow the sun and moving around the world, they're still not going to work on weekends. There's still going to be some downtime there. So high tolerance for downtime, looking at our 99.9 figures, 99.7 figures and things like that, would be anything that's tolerating multiple days cumulative over a year. But perhaps that's not the time frame you need to look at. Perhaps you need to look at a week. So anyway, office-based applications are one. Batch processing is another one. Something that does say your billing processing at the end of each month or each quarter. It runs at the end of each day to get totals, and those totals are then aggregated up at the end of the week, and then those weekly aggregates are done at the end of the month, and that's where everything spins off from, and you get your batches done at that point. Multiple different approaches to that, and there could be other scenarios out here. I'm sure there's plenty of others where having a couple of hours of downtime, preferably scheduled downtime, not just random downtime, is acceptable. Again, you don't want it to be random. So, in the scenario that we've got here, we're saying that the manual intervention is still okay because we've got a high tolerance for downtime. Perhaps that's not true. Perhaps during business hours, you're still going to have to go to this DC3 model so that you've got an arbiter here that can break ties, because your tolerance for downtime, although it is quite large, and you can have up to 6 hours of downtime a day, 25% downtime in that case, you cannot have random downtime between 9 AM to 5 PM. That's your window where you have to have as close to 100% uptime as possible. Maybe that's not the case, but usually you're going to run into do not touch zones in terms of any application. You may have something that as long as you give enough notice, you can take downtime. But most people are still going to end up in a scenario where they're going to want automatic failover and not manual intervention. If you're okay with manual intervention, exclude the DC3, go for the other one. You've still got a low tolerance for data loss, so you're going to want multiple copies of your data. And again, very, very similar to what we did in the last one. If you want to have at least 2 copies of your data in each data center, then you just pick whichever one should get an arbiter, so that you've got 3 out of 5 votes and things like that. Again, much better if this ends up in DC3 so that the automatic failover can actually occur, but if not, pick a side for it to go into, and be aware that if DC1 is lost, DC2 will require some manual intervention to actually get a primary again. So that's how you would deploy your replica set there. The capacity arguments, the variable in here, again, very, very similar to the previous scenario. When DC1 fails, if this is your primary hot site, do you need DC2 to be able to completely take up the slack? Or can you deal with reduced capacity for the duration of the outage? How long can you deal with that reduced capacity, etc., etc.? So that's your second group covered.